All right, let's get started. Welcome to this presentation on certified dashboards and self-service analytics. First thing I kind of want to just mention is that this is a 101. We're not going to dive super deep into a lot of the technical aspects that we but we're going to provide a high-level overview of how we created a dashboard at Tableau that satisfied our want for a self-service jumping-off point and with certified data on it. Come on in. Welcome. My name's Noah Stevens. I'm a program manager on our enterprise applications team at Tableau. And I led this project actually, along with a pretty big group. But I will first tell you guys a little bit about myself. Contact information, if you have any questions after the presentation, anything that we don't hit in the Q&A. Yeah, my Twitter handle, which I never check, so don't bother using it. So a little bit about myself. I've been at Tableau for 4 years now. And on this particular team, working with our sales organization for about 2 years. I live in Kirkland, Washington, which is just to the east of Seattle. Actually, right now, I'm taking a small break from paternity leave. I had a baby. My wife and I had a baby about 5 weeks ago. So I'll show you a picture of that. We tried to get a good picture. I was not able to look at the camera appropriately. That was a really good one. Yeah, our cat didn't like it. Anyway, we're big Seahawks fans. My wife was a cheerleader actually for the Seahawks, and we did manage to get one semi-good picture where I managed to look at the camera. So before Tableau, a long time before Tableau, a little bit more about myself. I attended University of St. Andrews in Scotland, which a lot of people will know because of this picture, if there's any golfers in the audience. Also, because I have a couple Royal classmates that I had some classes with actually, which is pretty interesting. So that's a little bit about myself. Next, we're going to actually get into the meat of the presentation. So, the agenda. This presentation is essentially a case study as an example of how at Tableau we built a certified dashboard that enabled people to not only answer the questions that they had specifically on that dashboard, but also as a jumping off point to use the data behind it to answer other questions that they had. So I'm going to give you an overview of what we did, present the problem that we had and the solution that we came up with, go over the approach, and then dive a little deeper into some of the work streams that we had, including a demo using anonymized but live data to show the design and the performance that we were able to achieve. I'm going to ask to hold questions till the end, though, because I think this should only take about 40 minutes, and if anybody has questions, we should have plenty of time afterwards. All right. So the first thing you might be asking yourself are, what are certified dashboards and kind of what is self-service? Certified dashboards are really about having an accurate data set in a single location that is fresh. So it might be live or it might be on a 20-minute delay or something like that, but that needs to be communicated and it needs to be accurate. Now, it's kind of, that accuracy question is interesting because a lot of the times you think, well, you just bring your data in, right? Well, sometimes with some complex questions that you're trying to answer, and sometimes they might even seem simple at first, accuracy can be an issue. And that was, one of the things that actually started this project and why we spent a lot of time and resources into building something that we could certify as accurate 100% of the time, and that people could use in a performant way. Self-service, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but the dashboards are built to, or this dashboard in particular was built as a jumping off point for people to not only answer the questions that are directly being answered on the dashboard, but also to use the data behind the dashboard. We enable people to download the dashboard, to download the data sets behind it, to answer other questions. And when we designed our data schema, we designed it so that it was broader than just the answers that just the questions we were answering on the dashboard, but also you could dial down or dial up a level. Also key to self-service is that it's usable. So it's great for us, for my team on the technical side, to be able to understand the schema, but sales users and analysts on the sales team need to also be able to understand the schema, and it needs to be easy to create new dashboards based off of that data. And I'll show you an example of our POC and the data behind our POC and how complicated it was versus the data behind our new dashboard that we put out that our executives are using. And then lastly, performance. It has to be performant. If you don't provide a performant data set, it's unlikely that people will use it unless it's the only thing that they can use. So that's pretty critical. We'll touch on performance quite a lot. All right. So I'm going to tell a little bit of a story about our problem. And this will make sense, and it might already make sense to you, but this will make sense as we talk about that. Our previous CEO, Christian Chabot, had an on-site customer meeting, a sales meeting, with a very large customer of ours. It was a very important meeting, and he got on site and was caught off guard by not knowing some critical information about that customer. Namely, that there was a work stoppage P1 escalated server case with the customer, where our server was not working for that customer. And it was frustrating. It was extremely frustrating for him after he came back out of that meeting. Did not go well. He came to our CFO, Tom Walker, and asked, what dashboards we have that could tell him this information readily and accurately. And Tom said, okay, yeah, we've got some stuff that I can show you. And he went looking for some dashboards, and this is kind of what he found. We had multiple dashboards, and some of the questions that he was asking were complex enough to where there were different calculations performed on each of those dashboards that resulted in different answers. And actually, some of them were as simple as how many licenses does this company own? It sounds like a really easy question to answer, but when you have mergers and acquisitions, you have multiple complex account hierarchies, licenses moving from one account to another, it can get pretty tricky to report on that accurately. And the same goes with spend. Where did we allocate the spend for that account? Was it at the top parent, or was it down the hierarchy somewhere? So Tom asked my team, to help build something that would prevent this from ever happening again. And we set out to do that. And this is what we built. So a screenshot of it, our enterprise account dashboard. It's pretty simple looking, but there's 17 different data sources that go into this. And as you can see also, by the way, it's anonymized data, and Dunder Mifflin, we don't actually sell to them, obviously. It's simple, it's pretty clean, but it was actually quite challenging to make something like this. And it took it took a long time, and it was expensive. We had a lot of resources dedicated to it. But we're pretty proud of the final product, and not just the dashboard and the design of it, but the performance and the data modeling, the schema behind the dashboard as well. So let me show you, I'm going to talk about how we got here, but let me show you quickly what our original, we built a POC for this, and the POC was not nearly as pretty, and it had it had about 2/3 of the information on the last dashboard. The problem was that the data there's redundant data on here. The design is busy. We didn't use color really effectively on the dashboard. It doesn't really tell a story. It's disjointed. This was our first draft, though. It was kind of our, hey, here's what we have now. As soon as we get off Go, we can build something pretty cool, though. And in order to do that, we presented our approach, and the first thing was we needed to gather the right team. And this is really one of the critical aspects of of the success of this project, is having the right number of people. Apologies for all of these mannequin heads being males. Actually, half of the team, 3/4 of the team was women. But anyway, the PM, that was me in the middle. We had a business analyst working with our stakeholders, the executives who asked for this, the sales organization who had a huge stake in this, and then actually almost every one of our other teams at Tableau other than our development team. So our marketing, tech support, customer operations, sales operations, we had input from every single team onto what should go into this data set and what should be shown on the dashboard. And then we had a visual analytics expert on the other side. This was a resource we have at Tableau who's been there for like 6 years now. She started out as a product consultant. She's extremely talented with visual analysis, and she's now a program manager actually on our analytics team. She's actually the lead of this group of talks about Sales 101. And then we had a data architect and engineers and QAs working on our database. All right, so how we approached the project. The first, you probably have seen something similar to this, and actually something like that, time, quality, money. What we wanted to look at, we wanted to balance making sure that this project balanced performance, breadth, and design breadth, so that we brought as much data as we could in, and completeness. The problem is that as you start to lean really heavily towards one of these, it definitely causes issue with one of the other areas. So the more details, the wider your data set is, your performance is going to suffer. And that was one of the issues that we had with the initial dashboard. While it was a fairly narrow data set, it was quite detailed and had some really heavy calculations behind it. And our performance was terrible, to be perfectly honest. That dashboard loaded in greater than 2 minutes typically, which our sales stakeholders and our executives were not okay with. The goal that they set forth was to be able to review something like this dashboard in a taxi or in an elevator. They needed something consumable in 30 seconds or less. So that said, we needed to balance time, quality, and money, because Given all the resources in the world, we could build anything, but we don't have all the resources in the world, and we were competing against other projects using the same resources that we had available to us. So our data team, our enterprise data services team, had some other very high priority projects. So we were forced to time box our development a little bit, and we were forced to spend a little less money on the data side in resources up front, basically. It's important, though, as you go out to build one of these, that you take this type of thing into consideration and set realistic expectations up front with your stakeholders on how much you can deliver based on the resources that you have available to you. Building a dashboard like that, it's really difficult. It takes a lot of time. Right, that said, we did get what we needed, and we locked our scope essentially, and set expectations with our executive team. That expectation, by the way, was that our dashboard would load in 30 seconds or less, so that it would be usable by the executive team. So next I want to talk briefly about the development lifecycle of something like this. Now, this is a condensed version of the different versions of our dashboard. So you can see kind of where we had that original POC, then we started adding some data to it, then we kind of brought our design in, and then we started iterating on the design. And that's one of the key things that we did here is we really adopted an iterative, agile approach to building this. And so there's our different steps. POC, we added some data, we added a lot more data, then we started designing it, and then we moved into making sure that it was usable, that empowerment section, and then making sure that it was performant. This wasn't, as I said, we tried to be as iterative as possible. This wasn't sequential, but also we had to be cognizant of how much time each step was going to take. So this kind of Gantt-ish chart shows kind of what we experienced. We spent the majority of our time making sure the data was accurate and performant. A much smaller amount of time locking in on the design and making sure that the dashboard was usable, and then another significant amount of time on performance. And basically, we were working on performance throughout, but it really came in at the end where we started focusing more on performance, and then we were able to update our data sources to make our dashboard more performant and to make some of the key metrics that we knew that other people would be asking about as well, performant. I just want to call out again, the data that goes behind one of these dashboards is going to be one of the most, it is the most important thing that you're going to run into, that you're going to want to focus on when building something like this. And that's why it took the most amount of time. So I'm going to talk next a little bit about that data. And how we designed it and what our approach was. So first, we used a dimensional database schema. The key here is that you need to model your data appropriately. That's what worked for us. That's what we found works really well for sales data and for bringing in a lot of different data from different organizations like the marketing team, tech support, all of these different data sources. But every project will be unique, so it's important that you talk to your data architects, your data developers, to make sure that you're appropriately modeling the data for what you're trying to do in your organization. We call our tables smart tables, sales master and reporting tool tables. They're, again, a dimensional data structure. We use dimension tables, fact tables, and help tables. We use these because it allows us to keep the columns pretty narrow in our tables, which adds to the performance. And also, it really helps with that usability factor. It's easy to know that, hey, I want to report on account data. I'm going to go to the account dimensions table. And then if I want to connect that to opportunities, I'm going to then join the account dimensions table to the opportunity dimension table. It makes it really easy for our analysts to be able to use this data source. The other thing is that it is so much more performant than some of the native tables that we brought in. So we're a pretty heavy Salesforce shop, and I imagine a lot of you will be able to, that'll be familiar to you. A lot of the native Salesforce tables that you bring into a database will not perform very well when they're joined natively on each other. Some of that has to do with how large they are. Some of it has to do with the type of data that's on there. And then some of it is as simple as what your keys are. Are you joining on a Salesforce ID? It's a 16-bit key. It's going to take a lot more time for Tableau, for any system to write that query to the database. Where on our smart tables, we use sequential. We use numeric keys. They start at 1 and they go down all the rows, and they're 4-bit. So it's a lot quicker on our database. Okay, so we kind of locked in our design of how we wanted to design our schema. I'm going to quickly show you what our original data model looked like. It's kind of this spider web. I'm sure you'll be familiar with how these look, but this is mostly Salesforce data with a little bit of Active Directory tables. And this is what our initial POC was built on. And this is where I was saying this was incredibly inefficient and was slow enough to where our executives were not willing to use it. What we had here is that we had about 1/3 of the data we needed as well. So business analysts on the project put together an overview of what data we had, what data was non-performant, and then what data was just missing that we wanted to report on but we didn't have. This is what it looked like. As you can see, there's a lot of red on there that represents the data that just doesn't exist in our database at the moment, or at that time. It does now. And then the yellow is all non-performant data. So we took this, we brought the data that we didn't have in to our SQL server. We built the smart tables that I mentioned earlier on this data. On top of it, we built smart tables for the yellow sections that was non-performant, a lot of the native Salesforce tables. And we built this big schema that enabled us to build this dashboard. So I'm going to show you really quickly what the new data source looks like, and it's kind of might not be what you think because it's going to look pretty complicated. But what you'll notice is that we don't have more than 3 joins anywhere. Most of this there's no chains of joins. Most of this is one table joining onto a couple other tables, or at the most, you'll have one table joined to another table, joined to another table. There's not this big spider web of tables. These are all Every time you don't see a join between anything, each line on here is a separate data source within our dashboard. So that was one of the other things that we did. We created data sources for each piece of the dashboard in order to keep the data minimized and make each piece of the dashboard as performant as possible. So we didn't need to bring in account data when we're talking about support cases, really, other than the account name. We need to know that this is the account that we're looking at, and then we need to know the account data. We don't need any opportunity data. We don't need anything else. So we kept the joins really minimal and the data as narrow as possible. We did a lot of data source filtering so that we're not even bringing data that we don't need into the Tableau data engine. And something that I'll touch on later when we talk a little bit more about performance is that we leverage cross-database joins a lot. It's something that I know that everybody's really excited for Hyper. Probably won't need to use that as much in Hyper, but a lot of people will be lagging behind on their versions of Tableau, and it's a pretty cool trick that you can use to boost your performance a little bit. Okay, so up to this point, we brought all of the data into the dashboard that we needed, and as I showed you before, we weren't done with that whole data modeling process until the dashboard was ready to be released. But for the most part, we locked in on what the questions are that we needed to answer, and the data that we needed to bring in order to answer that from a broad perspective. So what I want to talk about next is how we design the dashboard, because we really started designing the dashboard before we're anywhere near to finishing with the data phase. So this is our final dashboard. And a couple key things that I want to call out is that we designed this for mobile first. We took that into consideration. Basically, the goal was, hey, if somebody's in the field on an iPad or on their iPhone, we want this to be easy for them to use. So we kind of have these 4 columns, and those columns are the length of an iPhone. So you can swipe from left to right on them as you're going through the different pieces. And then it's actually 3 columns on the iPad, and then you swipe for one for the last column. And then the next thing I want to call out is that we're pretty monochromatic with our color. We only used color really to highlight areas that need to be highlighted. And then we use pretty simple visualizations. There's mostly just bar charts and a couple area graphs on this. It looks cool because everything is simple, but it is definitely, with the exception of the hierarchy diagram that's on the top left, which was really fun and interesting to build. With the exception of that, everything is pretty consistently a bar chart or an area graph. It just makes it easy to consume the data quickly. And then the last thing, before we dive into actually, I'm going to run through showing you how this thing works, is that these are fairly top-level metrics. You're not going to see a lot of details here, but details are really easily available on this dashboard via tooltips, and there's a lot of filtering that can be done on the dashboard as well. So again, it was, let's give the executives something that they can see and consume in under a minute, 30 seconds to a minute. And if they have further questions, they can dive further into it. Okay. Switch over really quick. Okay, this is the dashboard live. So I am going to quickly show you how moving from one account to another happens. So we crushed our performance goals. This, to be fair, this is limited to 3 fake accounts. So instead of having 800 or 1,000 accounts in here to look at, there's only a couple. It does help a little bit on the performance, but this thing is really, really fast. And then if you want a little bit more information about the company that you're looking at, Stark Industries in this case, we're going to give you a hover, and we're going to provide a ton of information for the sales team, for the executive team. We've got territory information, how long they've been a customer with us, et cetera. And then next, your eyes are most likely going to be drawn to this thing. The reason we built this, and this was fun, I said, because we had to do a bunch of research to figure out how to do this, but we wanted to know what our penetration was, our sales penetration at different account levels within a large sales hierarchy, so that we could do a little bit of lightweight, snapshot white space analysis. So this is a diagram of an account's hierarchy, and each of the blue bubbles are sized by how much money they have spent with Tableau. And then you can hover on that and see what the account was, and all the same information for the top parent account. And then additionally, if you click on that, it can actually filter to the entire dashboard will filter onto that account. So all of the sales revenue numbers, the pipeline numbers, the retention, everything will filter to that single account. The other thing that we wanted to show were some high-level account teams at Tableau. So this is, our account managers, our customer success managers. If we have, elite support with that customer, who the elite support territory, the elite support account manager is. And then something cool that we did here is that we enabled direct emails and a link to, we use Jabber at Tableau. It's a Cisco instant messaging product. A link to directly open an instant message with that salesperson. The revenue bar is fairly simplistic. It's basically showing the license maintenance and subscription maintenance renewal information, some pretty basic stuff. There's not a whole lot further here. You can filter your lifetime spend area charts to those individual metrics. Oops. All right. Our asset counts was something that was really important to us, though. So we do dial a little deeper into this to show number of different types of products, registration numbers, how many of the actual keys have been registered, and these aren't going to line up because this is anonymized data. It's all random. So, but it does in real life. And then down through our product line, and then we mirror kind of the pipeline and try to keep it next to revenue so that it felt seamless, like you were looking from, hey, here's what we've done with this customer and here's what we have in the future with them. We touch on some services and training, what they've spent with us and how much they have available. And then marketing, this is an interesting one. We show our engagement, or what our expected engagement is with this customer, based on number of contacts divided by how much they've actually engaged with us. And then finally, our retention and support metrics. And this is one of the ones where we talked about, we didn't want to use a lot of color, but we need to know if there's a P1 open case, we need to know exactly what that is. So this will allow you to actually link out to the case. So this will link straight into our Salesforce. An executive can see, hey, this is a server stoppage and I need to put some pressure on this, or at least know about it when I'm going in to talk to a customer. One other thing that I usually have all the tabs hidden down at the bottom. One thing that I wanted to show you was the color usage on the tabs. This doesn't really have to do with design, and you might not be able to see it very well on this, but one of the things that we did, or that my team did to help organize the vast amount of data sources and the 50 different tabs that go into building this dashboard was we colored each tab uniquely based on the data source that it came from. And then on the data source, we actually named the data sources that color. So it enabled us when we were looking at performance or when we were trying to make changes to a certain data source, it enabled us to easily go in and see what the data source was and what any of the queries that were having issues were. And then if we made changes to that data source, we could easily swap the data source out and know which sheets it applies to. Actually, I said that we were going to take questions at the end, but if anybody has any questions really quickly on design, I'd love to go through those now. Yeah.
Can you high level talk to how you did that?
Sure. Yeah, so we did not do that in Tableau. We did not do what enabled that in Tableau. It's in Tableau, as you can see. We built 2 tables in our SQL database that assigned a Y coordinate to each account dynamically. So as a sub account is added, it would modify the Y value for all of the other accounts and basically evenly distribute them along, I think it was like a range from -1 to 1. And then we gave each account an account level, so we flattened the hierarchy out. And then that basically gave us an X and a Y that we were able to put them onto the graph there. And then the last thing we had to do was create a dummy record at the parent's level so that we could draw the line back to the parent. That's high level. I could totally talk to you afterwards if you want to dive a little deeper into it. But basically it ended up being 2 help tables in our database that run just that one viz. Anything else on the design quickly before we move on? Yep.
If you have like 1,000 accounts, is there a way to search by name or anything instead of just scrolling down?
Yeah, there is. And it's missing on my fake dashboard, but there's a highlight button or a highlight text input box. It might be actually, no, it's not. I took pictures from this dashboard for the presentation, but yes, there is. We use the highlight feature to do that actually, rather than a filter or anything like that.
So that account administration view, you by department, or is that basically like the Salesforce accounts you all have?
That's our Salesforce accounts. That's in our particular situation, that was what made sense to us. But for other companies, you could do it. I mean, it's easily adaptable to what you need to do. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to move on back to presentation. And let's talk a little bit more about performance. So the first thing is that you want to set realistic goals. I mentioned that we have 17 data sources in that dashboard. We're not going to get a sub 5-second loading dashboard. It's like virtually impossible. So that's critical. But what I can say is that we got a 600% increase in performance from our original POC to the final dashboard, and we increased the data by 60%, the amount of data, the breadth and the depth of data. So that is a huge testament to using a dimensional database structure. It's extremely performant when compared to a lot of other structures. The next thing that I wanted to mention is, and I talked about this a little earlier, we use cross-database joins. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with cross-database joins and probably use them when you're joining between different databases. The difference here is that we actually use cross-database joins on the same database. And we did this as kind of a little, it's kind of a little tip. As I said, Hyper's gonna probably make this irrelevant. But the way that the Tableau data engine works, if you take two tables from the same database, you connect to them separately, and then do a cross-database join, it brings the data in more efficiently. It's weird, but it's just a tip that we employed to, like, we were trying to shave every second off. So we looked for everything that we could do. We talked to our product team, and they were like, hey, you can do this. So we did, and you guys can do this on anything that you have right now, and it'll give you a little performance boost. The other thing that I really want to focus on in this is how we really, the performance aspect of what we were working on in this project and the data aspect were this iterative process, and they kind of were throughout the project. I used a third-party tool to help analyze the performance of the dashboard. You'll probably recognize this. These guys are out in Data Village. It's power tools for Tableau Desktop. And it enabled me to analyze every query and every sheet on my dashboard, identify areas that were performing slowly, then go in and either pull the queries out of Tableau. So what I mean by that is that we would say, hey, there's this huge aggregation, and it's taking 15 seconds for Tableau to calculate that aggregation. Well, we know we can do it in SQL in no time and essentially save all of that load time in Tableau. So we would take that one aggregation, we'd pull it out of Tableau, we would write a new column in one of our smart tables, and then we would replace that entire calculation with that new field. The dimensional database structure really lent well to that kind of development process as well. We're able to just add columns on really easily and really intuitively into the right places. So we ended up building a bunch of summary columns for aggregated information at like the top parent level in our account hierarchy, because that way we could show, we wouldn't have to have Tableau aggregate all of the, let's say, sales numbers all the way up the chain. We just pull it in one nice, clean, easy value. The other thing that this really, that's really important about that is that our spend numbers and like assets, the actual licenses you've sold, depending on what kind of business you have, can be complicated, as I mentioned before, to calculate accurately. And when we're trying to build something that we want everybody in our company to go out and say, hey, this is certified, this is an accurate data source that you can use to build your own dashboards, we want to make sure that some of those calculations we've done and we know exactly how they've been done and that they've been done 100% accurately. So this really, I got a little bit off topic there and dived into the accuracy, but this enabled us to not only be performant in how we were building the data sources, but also it did help enable some accuracy as well from a self-service, certified data source kind of perspective. Also, what this helped us do was, as I was analyzing things, we were able to narrow down the columns and the data, and that's really important when you're trying to create something performant, is that you're not on your dashboard that you're showing to everybody that you want to be performant. You don't want to have a bunch of extra columns on there. You don't want to have a bunch of extra tables. It's all adding to the data that Tableau has to load in order to surface your vises. So you want that data to all be available to people so that if they say, hey, this dashboard doesn't answer this question exactly that I have, it's a little different, they can go in, they can edit the dashboard, they can download it and modify it, or they can go create their own dashboard using the same data sources. But from a actual production level sales dashboard, you want to minimize that data. I think that's probably pretty obvious, but it is important. So I wanted to really pound that in. So we're kind of close to the end here, but I just want to reiterate on the aspects that really made this self-service and what you guys should be striving for when you're trying to build something that enables self-service and that you can say is a certified dashboard. You're going to want to make sure that all your data is as accurate as possible, that it's fresh and that it's performant. The takeaway there is just I like to think about it like this. You want to give the right answer, and you want to make sure that that answer is easily available and that it's quick. Because if you don't hit those things, people probably are going to they're going to try and find out a different way to do it, especially if it's not quick. And we found that out quite a lot at Tableau. Speed has really been a factor. And then the design of the dashboard is really going to help you enable self-service. So you need something that's simple and that's usable. It's easy to consume the information, but at the same time, it needs to be able to be a jumping off point. You need to have data behind it that people can use if they have answers that are more specific or slightly different from what you are showing on your dashboard. And then again, I put it on here twice, it's got to be performant. And simplicity can lead to that, but also a lot of the structure behind it is going to be what you're really going to need to rely on to add to the performance. Whoops. Well, I'm going to open it up to Q&A. Yeah?
Yeah, could you elaborate a bit on at what stage of the process you actually end up with the dimensional model?
Yeah, we started right away. We started building out the dimensional model immediately. And what we did is we built it at first on a stage server. And then we started connecting the dashboard to that stage server. And then as soon as we would productionalize that table in our new dimensional database, we would just flip from the stage server to the production server. And you can do that really easily in Tableau. You just go into the data source and you can replace it. And as long as they're the same on each side, it just works perfectly.
What have your adoption?
They've been good. This,
Can you give me like some ballpark?
yeah. Well, so let me qualify that because this, we limited our data set. We limited our data set to our strategic enterprise territory level for this dashboard. And so that's only 800 accounts. Our adoption numbers have been, off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly, but the dashboard's been viewed over 10,000 times, I believe, since we launched it. So you've got 60 or 80 sales, around 100 sales reps, and the executives mostly who have been using it. So they use it consistently. That's what we've found.
With a team of that size, how long did this take you all to build?
How long did it take to build?
Yeah.
4 months. Yeah.
Was that 4 months from start to finish, POC to final
No, the POC took a little bit longer. That kind of problem area happened, but we didn't really get off Go. The POC took 5 days to build. I built it like between doing my normal workload. Then there was like a period, where we needed executive approval and for resources and all that kind of stuff. When we actually got off Go, it took about 4 months.
What was the name of that tool that tied the different components of your
Power tools for Tableau Desktop. It's InnerWorks, I believe.
Some data questions. You said you're working with 7 different data sources?
17, yeah.
17, sorry. Are all on the same database, or is it?
So we brought them all into the same database. Originally, they were all on different databases, and we connected those. So we brought that data in through our data integration platform into a single server, and then basically brought it all into that dimensional data source that we used.
So this is basically a huge join on different tables instead of working with 17 different data sources, right?
A huge join on.
So you mentioned you had the data on the same database. You
Mhm.
can work with just one SQL.
Yeah.
So we are talking about one real data source instead of 17 different, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And then it is a little tricky when we use the word data source, because the actual connection that Tableau makes, even if it's to the same it's to the same data source, they call it a separate data source, right? So there's 17 connections actually back to the same data source, and then multiple different data sources that are being joined up into that one SQL server. Yep. Yep.
So when building dashboards for our sales team, there's a quote that always sticks out in my head. It's a Henry Ford quote, which says, if I asked what they would have wanted, they would have said faster courses.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you guys balance interviewing stakeholders, figuring out the scope of what they want versus the best friends, like what you guys want?
Good question. What we really did was we made sure that we were following a DAISY and that we had one approver. So we let all of the stakeholders, all of them were able to contribute. But when it came down to it, our CFO was approving what was going on the dashboard. And that was what really helped us keep everything from spiraling out of control, I would say. And also it was really, really helpful to have somebody working in a kind of BA role to make sure that we were getting all of that data from our stakeholders, all aggregated and brought to us. Yep, go ahead.
The cross-database joins you were talking about that made performance better. So are you referring to like 2 separate data sources being imported to Tableau and then joining them after the fact?
Yep.
Okay.
And the key there is there are 2 separate data sources in Tableau, but they're connecting to the same data, to the same SQL server, really. But you're just pulling one table from one data source and one table from the other data source and then doing a cross-database join.
Same SQL server, but with distinct SQL tables from that server?
Yeah, same tables from that server.
Same table, same server.
Yep. But
One giant, to the gentleman's question there, one giant, 70 million on record, down, and then let's call it 20 some odd columns,
no, sorry. No. Multiple tables on that server, like 20 tables on the server. And each table, we try to minimize the number of columns on each table. So you have like less than 20 columns on most tables. The thin tables are consumed by Tableau a lot better than big wide tables. That was one of the areas where that dimensional data structure, like that's what we were doing there. We were taking even like, let's take the Salesforce account table. In our Salesforce instance, that has 400 columns. We split that up. We split that up into a bunch of different tables, basically. Are these Are these actual dimensions that apply to an account? Then they go on the dimension table, the account dimension table. Did they apply to something else, not even to account, but they just happen to live on the account table? We're going to put them where they belong. So that's what we did.
You mentioned that you are working with Salesforce data. Are all these data based off Salesforce?
No, it's not all Salesforce. A lot of it is Salesforce. Some of it's Eloqua. Some of it is Active Directory. There's others that don't come to the top of my mind.
So it's basically the same setup we have. So my question is, you are bringing the Salesforce data via an ETL process into your database due to performance issues with the live connection, right?
It's not a live connection into the.
Yeah.
Yep.
And this refresh daily or
We refresh every 20 minutes.
every 20 minutes?
Yeah.
So your Salesforce system, you're not using web data,
No.
for financial systems.
Yep. That's correct. The data connector with the amount of data that we have in Salesforce is not very performant, unfortunately, at this point. Yeah.
I have two questions on going back to your Gantt chart. You had one bar labeled as empowerment. How do you define empowerment?
So empowerment and design they were really close. I wanted to call it out because when we finalized on how the dashboard looked, like the color palette and all that stuff, that wasn't necessarily where we stopped iterating on the design of the dashboard. Next, when we moved into that empowerment phase, or if we want to call it that, we were really looking at how the data flowed across the dashboard and how it was going to be consumed, where people's eyes were drawn first, and then kind of if this is showing this, what is their next question going to be, and is the data available to answer that question? And then making sure that, as I said, bringing the data into our server so that it would be available to answer the question.
And then my second part was, when you have performance going last, is that intentional? Because I personally not struggle, but as there's similar flow for the most part, but I'm like, early on in my data phase, performance is like way up front, so I'm just asking because
I mean, we were.
it's slowing down.
Yeah. So there's a couple things. The first is that we were really focused on performance more towards the middle and the end, but it was always a factor. And we were always looking at performance. And the second is that we were in a unique situation where we needed to put as much of the development up front on the database side, and then the heavy lifting of the development, the architecture work, the building out of most of the tables, and the basic like design of all of the tables that all of the tables that we were building up front, and then we focused on making each one of those tables more performant kind of a little bit later down the road when we had less developer resources. So it was, if I was to do it again and I had, again, all the resources in the world, I would probably focus on performance heavily throughout the entire thing. But where we were at, we needed to time box that development a little bit. Joe.
Yeah. When you aggregated the data inside of SQL, did that present any problems with doing drill downs within the dashboard?
So the way that this data structure is set up, it doesn't actually, because, and this is part of the fact that we designed it and we knew what was going to go on the dashboard. All the data that's pre-aggregate data is still available in the data source. It's just that when we wanted to show that big number, like this is how many assets you have, this is how many desktop licenses you have, that was a bit, that was difficult for Tableau to calculate. So for that particular piece, we would pre-aggregate the data. But then as you look into the specifics of it, then we pull in the data that's not aggregated and show it. Anything else? All right, good, we're at time, so perfect. Thanks, everybody.